Lillian had spent her life consumed by fear, enduring relentless abuse at the hands of her father. But on the edge of death, not once but 3 times, she encountered something beyond human comprehension. From floating in a radiant divine light to witnessing an alien presence in a realm beyond life, her near-death experiences reshaped her understanding of pain, love, and forgiveness. What she discovered would not only change her, but also the man who had hurt her most.
My name is Lillian, and for as long as I can remember, fear was the foundation of my life. It lurked in every shadow, clung to every breath, and settled into my bones like an unwelcome guest. The walls of our trailer felt too thin to contain the rage that erupted within them. My father's temper was like a switchblade, quick, sharp, and unpredictable. The air inside our home smelled of stale beer, cigarette smoke, and something heavier, something unspoken. My mother barely spoke above a whisper, and my older brother, Damien, had learned to carry his silence like armor. Some nights, my father came home in a drunken fury, the door swinging open so hard that it nearly flew off its hinges. I knew the sound of his boots against the linoleum floor, the way they staggered unevenly before he found his target. Damien and I would lock eyes, our silent signal to brace ourselves. If we were lucky, he'd collapse in his chair, a bottle still clutched in his fist. If we weren't, well, those were the nights I tried to erase from memory. His favorite way to hurt me was with his hands. Not just the weight of his fists, but the way he used them to remind me that I was nothing. There were times he would slap me so hard my ears would ring for hours, or shove me against the wall until my vision blurred. I remember being 8 years old when he grabbed me by my hair and dragged me across the floor just because I had dropped his beer bottle. "Worthless," he muttered, his voice almost casual, as if he were stating a simple fact. Damien got it just as bad, but he handled it differently. Maybe because he was older, maybe because he had fire in him that I lacked. He fought back, even when it was useless. One night, when our father pressed a gun against his forehead, Damien didn't flinch. His lip trembled, but his eyes burned with something defiant. "Go ahead," he whispered. "Do it." He didn't, but he could have, and the fact that we both knew it made it worse. Damien left the first chance he got, ran off at 17, found a job in the city, and never looked back. I envied him for it. Maybe I even hated him a little for leaving me behind. But I understood. Our mother was there, but in name only. She floated through life like a ghost, barely acknowledging us, barely acknowledging herself. I went to her once after my father had beaten me, my lips split, my ribs aching. She was at the sink scrubbing dishes that were already clean. "Mom," I whispered, "please." She paused, sighed, and placed a hand on my cheek for just a moment. Then she turned back to the sink. I never asked her for help again. Books became my refuge long before I understood why I needed one. I read anything I could get my hands on. Tattered library books, old paperbacks my mother kept in a cardboard box under her bed, even the backs of cereal boxes when nothing else was available. When I read, I wasn't Lillian, the scared little girl trapped in a trailer filled with rage. I was someone else, someone braver, stronger, someone who could run, fight, escape. I spent hours curled up in the corner of my room, whispering the words under my breath, willing them to pull me somewhere else. Church, though, was a different kind of escape. My parents had once been part of a congregation, but they were asked to leave long before I was old enough to understand why. They never went back, but I did. Every Sunday morning, I walked down the dirt road to the little church at the edge of town. I'd slip into the back pew, fold my hands in my lap, and listen. I liked the way the preacher spoke about love, about kindness, about a God who saw everything and still chose to love us. I wanted to believe in that. I needed to. But sometimes when I sat in that pew and thought about the bruises on my arms, the welts across my back, I couldn't help but wonder, if God saw everything, why didn't he stop it? Why did he let my father hurt me? Why did he let my mother turn away? One Sunday, I gathered the courage to ask, After the service, I approached my Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Elkins, a kind woman with gray hair and soft eyes. "If God sees everything," I asked, my voice small, "why does he let bad things happen?" She smiled, but there was a sadness behind it. "God gives people free will, sweetheart," she said gently. "He doesn't make them do bad things. They choose to." I nodded like I understood, but the answer felt hollow. At night, when the house was quiet and I lay curled on my thin mattress, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, I whispered prayers into the darkness. "God, are you really there?" I would ask. "Do you love me?" The silence that followed was always deafening. Still, I kept going to church. I kept reading. I clung to those things like a drowning person clings to a life raft, desperate for something to hold on to. Maybe I didn't always believe, but I wanted to, and sometimes wanting was the only thing keeping me afloat. I was 10 years old the first time I died. I don't remember what led up to it. One moment, I existed in pain. The usual aches, the dull throbbing of bruises that never seemed to fade. And the next, I was weightless. I wasn't in my body anymore. I was floating outside of everything, hovering above the backyard of our trailer. Our backyard was surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence, half covered in overgrown weeds. My father liked it that way. It meant the neighbors couldn't see what happened inside. But in that moment, none of that mattered. I wasn't afraid. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I moved without effort, without fear, without the crushing weight that had always sat on my chest. Below me, the dry grass swayed, even though there was no wind. The sky stretched wide and endless above me. And then a light. It wasn't like the sun. It didn't burn or blind. It was soft and endless, yet more real than anything I had ever seen. The moment I noticed it, I knew exactly what it was. God. Not the way I had pictured him in church, not as a man on a throne. This was different. It wasn't a face or a voice. It was pure presence, pure love, filling every part of me at once. I hadn't realized how empty I had been until I felt it, like I had been starving my whole life without knowing it. Then he spoke. It wasn't a voice, not really. It wasn't sound at all. It was something deeper, something inside me, yet separate from my own thoughts. It was something I simply understood. "You are here because you have something to do." A wave of warmth washed over me. The idea that God had a purpose for me, the girl no one wanted, the girl who only ever felt pain, was almost too much to comprehend. "Do you wish to continue?" I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. Somehow I knew he was asking if I wanted to stay with him or go back. I didn't hesitate. Yes. Then he told me what I needed to do. "You must be baptized." Joy swelled in me, though I didn't fully understand why. I thought baptism itself was my purpose, that it was why I had been sent back. But maybe, looking back, it was meant for something more. Maybe it was a message. Before I could ask, the light faded, and I fell. It wasn't like waking from a dream. It was a violent re-entry, a sudden crash back into my body. My limbs felt heavy, my head throbbed, and the warmth, the love, was gone. But I was back, and I had work to do. I was 15 the night I decided I couldn't do it anymore. The bruises from my father's last beating hadn't even begun to fade, and every breath sent sharp pain through my ribs. But it wasn't just the physical pain. It was the words. It was the way he looked at me after he struck me, his voice eerily calm as he muttered, "I hate you." And then quieter, almost as if he were talking to himself. "I've thought about killing you before, but I don't want to get caught." Something inside me shattered. I had always known he despised me, but hearing it spoken so plainly, so casually, made me feel like I was less than human. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, I whispered one last prayer. "God, please, let me die." And then, the pain. A sudden crushing pressure exploded at the base of my skull, unlike anything I had ever felt before. My entire body tensed, frozen in agony, and then, just as quickly as it came, it vanished. I exhaled, but something felt off. The weight of my body was gone. The bed beneath me was gone. The entire world was gone. I was floating. No light, no sound, nothing. Just blackness stretching forever. At first, I wasn't afraid. If this was death, it was peaceful in its own way. I felt weightless, detached. But then the realization crept in. I was still thinking. I was still aware. I wasn't supposed to be aware. I was supposed to be gone. Panic surged through me. Was this hell? Was I trapped? Would I be here forever? And then, something shifted. A presence. It didn't come from outside of me. It came from everywhere at once. A force so vast, so overwhelming, so loving that it wrapped around me like warm water. God. Not as a man, not as a voice, but as everything. And in an instant, I knew. I understood the universe, existence, love, purpose. It was all so simple, so obvious. And I laughed because, how had I not seen it before? I was loved. I had always been loved. Even in my darkest moments, I had never been alone. Then, just as suddenly as the knowledge came, it began to fade. I was somewhere else now, a cavern filled with soft, pulsing light. I pressed myself against a jagged stone wall, hiding. I didn't know why. I only knew I wasn't supposed to be here. And then I saw her. She stepped into view, glowing and ethereal, her body shifting like the colors of an aurora borealis. Her form was humanoid, but not human. Long limbs, an elongated head, enormous black eyes that seemed to hold the entire cosmos. An alien. I should have been afraid, but I wasn't. She turned her head slightly, observing me. Though she had no eyebrows, no expression that I could read, I felt her surprise, her unease. She was afraid of me. Are you going to stop hiding? The words weren't spoken aloud. They were inside my head, the same way God had spoken to me before. But this voice was different. It was hers. I hesitated before stepping out from the shadows. My gaze stayed locked on hers. You're beautiful, I whispered. My own voice sounded distant, unreal. She didn't respond. She simply watched me, and then I noticed it. Behind her, embedded in the cavern wall, was a massive screen. It glowed softly, shifting, flickering. And I realized it was my life. Scenes played out in front of me. Memories I had lived, moments I had forgotten. I watched myself as a little girl, curled in the corner of my room, a book clutched tightly in my hands. I saw myself in church, whispering prayers into the dark. I saw bruises, tears, silence. I saw my father's rage, my mother's emptiness. I already knew all of this. Why do you keep showing me this? I asked, my voice growing stronger. I already know about my life. I want to know about you. She didn't answer. She just looked at me, then at the screen. I sighed and turned back to watch. A new scene played. Me, standing on stage in my high school auditorium. The crowd was filled with students, teachers, parents. The school musical. I was the lead. I had 7 solos, no understudy. And then the realization hit me like a lightning bolt. If I died, the show would be canceled. It was something so small, so insignificant, but it shattered the lie I had been telling myself for years, that my absence wouldn't matter, that no one would care. I mattered. As soon as that thought solidified, the cave vanished. I was yanked backward, as if an invisible rope had wrapped around my chest and pulled me through endless space at impossible speed. Then, impact. I slammed back into my body so hard, I lurched forward, gasping, vomiting onto the floor. My head pounded, my limbs trembled, my breath came in ragged gasps. I was alive. But more than that, I understood. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. My bruises still ached, My ribs were still sore. My father was still the same, but I had changed. For the first time, I saw him clearly, not just as my tormentor, but as a man filled with his own wounds, his own pain, his own loneliness. And I knew, in that moment, that people only hurt others when they feel unloved. I didn't wake up that morning suddenly loving my father. I didn't wake up feeling warm and whole, as if everything had been healed overnight. The bruises were still there. The memories hadn't disappeared, but something inside me had shifted. I didn't excuse what he had done. I didn't justify it, but for the first time I saw him, not as a monster, but as a man. A broken, bitter, angry man who had never learned how to love. And I realized something I had never considered before. People hurt others when they feel unloved. I didn't know how to love him. I didn't even know if I wanted to. But I had seen something greater than myself, greater than him, greater than all the pain I had endured. I had felt pure, unconditional love. And if I had been given that kind of love, after everything I had suffered, then maybe, just maybe, I was meant to give that love to others. Even to him. But how? The words "I love you" felt impossible. I couldn't say them. I wasn't ready. But I could think them. I could hold on to one good thing about him, something small, something real, something I could respect. I found it in his garden. For all the terrible things he had done, my father had always taken care of our yard. He planted roses, fruit trees, flowering bushes. Our house might have been filled with fear, but outside there was life. So I made a choice. Every time he yelled at me, every time his voice filled the air with rage, I would ignore the words. I wouldn't react. Instead, I would silently repeat the same phrase in my mind. You are a great gardener, you are a great gardener, you are a great gardener. And with each thought, I imagined love flowing from me to him, like light filling the space between us. At first, nothing changed. He still yelled. He still looked at me with that same familiar anger. But then, one evening, he raised his hand like he was about to hit me. And hesitated. His face twitched, like something inside him was breaking apart. Weeks passed, then months. The yelling became less frequent. The rage in his eyes dimmed. And then, one day, he looked at me, not with hatred, not with fury, but with something else, something fragile. Regret. I feel like you're the only person in the world who loves me, he said, his voice quiet. I had never told him that I loved him, not once. But somehow, he had felt it. For years, I kept my near-death experiences to myself. I knew what people would say, that it was trauma, that it was my brain firing off random images, that I had imagined it all because I needed to believe in something bigger than my suffering. Even my brother Damien dismissed it. When I finally told him about it, he just shook his head. Sounds like Stockholm Syndrome, he muttered. He couldn't understand why I had chosen to forgive our father. He couldn't understand why I had changed. But I had. I wasn't the same person who had once prayed for death. I wasn't the same girl who had felt invisible, unloved, forgotten, because I knew the truth now. I had seen it. I had felt it. My friends, the ones who trusted science over faith, told me near-death experiences were nothing more than hallucinations, a flood of chemicals in the brain, a desperate mind trying to make sense of its own mortality. But what I experienced was more real than this life. I understood something now that I hadn't before. Love is the most powerful force in the universe. I had spent my childhood drowning in its absence. I had suffered because the people around me didn't know how to love. But what I had learned, what I had seen in that endless light, what the alien had shown me, what God had made me feel, was that love heals. Suffering exists because of its absence. The people who lash out in cruelty, who hurt others, who destroy the ones closest to them, they are the ones who need love the most. I didn't excuse my father. I didn't erase what he had done. But I saw him, and that was enough. I started living differently after that, not because I had all the answers, but because I chose to. I chose to believe that there was meaning in my suffering. I chose to believe that if I had been shown love, I was meant to give it in return. Even when it was hard. Even when it didn't make sense. I would never be able to explain my experiences in a way that would satisfy skeptics. I could never make someone believe what I had seen, what I had felt. But I didn't need to, because I knew, and that was enough. I don't claim to have all the answers. I don't pretend to understand every mystery in the universe. But if there's one thing I do know, one truth I carry with me from everything I've experienced, it's this. Even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone. There were times in my life when I thought no one saw me, when I believed I was invisible, unwanted, forgotten. But I know now that wasn't true. God had always been there. Love had always been there, even when I couldn't feel it. I used to think my suffering was proof that I didn't matter, that I was abandoned, that my pain was meaningless. But I was wrong. My pain taught me how to see others who were suffering. It taught me how to love people even when they were broken, even when they didn't know how to love me back. I don't excuse what my father did, but I understand him now. I see him for who he was, a man who never learned how to be anything else. And maybe I was meant to show him, even if only for a moment, that he was loved anyway. I don't know why I was given those experiences. I don't know why I saw the things I did, but I believe it was meant to teach me something, to change me, to make me different. And it did. I choose to live differently now. I choose to love, even when it's hard, even when people don't deserve it. Because love isn't about who deserves it, it's about who needs it the most. People ask me if I ever heard from my father again. I didn't. He faded from my life, just like my bruises eventually faded from my skin. But I don't carry the weight of him anymore. I don't hold on to the hate. Instead, I hold on to love. Because if I learned anything from my time beyond this world, it's this: love is the only thing that lasts. I didn't. He faded from my life, just like my bruises eventually faded from my skin. But I don't carry the weight of him anymore. I don't hold on to the hate. Instead, I hold on to love. Because if I learned anything from my time beyond this world, it's this: love is the only thing that lasts.